Hey there! If you use a chess engine to analyze your games, you might have seen an evaluation that goes 0.00 or something very close to zeros. So in this video we're going to see how this evaluation can sometimes be fairly straightforward, but in other cases it can actually be a bit misleading or not enough to understand a position. So in this video we're going to learn how to evaluate such positions and also some general ideas when evaluating a position with a chess engine. So if you don't have a chess engine, there's a free way to analyze your games by using chess.com. Simply go to the left side and then under Learn, go to Analysis. Or you can simply type in chess.com/analysis and you have the option to set up a position if you don't have the game already uploaded on chess.com. So here you can simply click on Set up a position and then you have the option to remove the pieces and then add as many pieces as you want. Then you simply click on Load and you'll get a position. So I'm going to set up this position where we have just symmetry, equal material. Personally, I know that this position is just absolutely equal. So if I go to Analysis, we just see that we get a lot of zeros. So the position is just fairly equal and white can play actually many moves. We have at least 3 options: e3, e4, king to e1, even king to f3. We see that the evaluation doesn't change. We get a fairly easy drawish position. So in this case, the evaluation is very straightforward. But let me show you other cases where these evaluations can either be misleading or at least we should definitely know what to do after getting such evaluation. So I'm going to show you one line that we get in the Pierce defense. By the way, if I play the move e4, we see that e6, which is the French defense, seems to be suggested by this engine, which is Stockfish 16 in this case. So let me make a few notes. The evaluation that you get is given by the engine that you're using, but you might use another engine and you might get a slightly different evaluation. So these evaluations in some cases are definitely not that accurate. In fact, here the move e6 is not necessarily better than the move c5, which is the Sicilian defense. So I'm gonna play the move d6, which is the Pierce defense. We see that we get a small plus for white. And this is something that is very often played in design: d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and after g6, f4 is one of the many options that white has. And bishop to g7, knight to f3 is commonly played here. And now black can play the move c5. And one common way for white to go here is going bishop to b5. And after bishop to d7, again white has more than one option, but one idea is to go e5, attacking the knight. And here after knight to g4, again white has many options, but one idea is to go e6. The idea is that the bishop cannot capture on e6 because the bishop is pinned. So taking on e6 seems to make a lot of sense, and one idea here is to go knight to g5. And now we see that we get a fairly equal position, but only if black plays the best moves here, because bishop takes b5 is the only move that is within the balance. Knight to c6 is already close to +1 for white. And after bishop takes b5, the best reaction according to the engine is to go knight takes c6. And now we get this position where the engine is giving a slight plus for white, but only if black plays the move bishop takes d4, which is definitely not a natural move if you have this position for the first time, at least if you have to play in this position quickly, because black is sacrificing the queen on the 8. So after bishop takes d4, this is the only move that is seemingly keeping the balance, or at least white is not gaining a large advantage here. And now white has 2 main options. One of them is to take on b5. But let's first analyze the other option, which is more natural, which is to take the queen on the 8. And now we get 0.00, but only if black plays the move bishop to f2. Otherwise, white has a queen for a minor piece, so this would just be very bad for black. But black is in time to give a perpetual check after the move bishop to f2. A perpetual check is a common scenario when the engine can correctly evaluate, but on the other hand, we need to see this perpetual check ourselves. So here after the move bishop to f2, king to d2, and bishop to e3, the king cannot go to e2 because we have the bishop on b5, so here we get a perpetual check. And if I go back to this position, after the move bishop takes d4, the other main option for white here is to take the knight on b5, and we still get a position where black has to be very accurate. So if you play this as black, you definitely need to know these important ideas in this position, because otherwise you're gonna get a lost position. So here the move queen to a5 is another important idea. So black is in time to get material back, and this position is actually still quite complicated. The main point of this video is not to focus on one opening line, and here the engine is given a slight plus for white after the move queen to d2, but again it depends on which engine you use to analyze this position. I've seen this position as dead equal on other engines, and even this advantage is very tiny. So if you want to know more about how to evaluate positions with an engine, not only those positions where you have an apparent equality, you might want to check my free course where I'll teach you how to train on a daily basis and how to accurately analyze all of your games with an engine, and how you can easily assess any evaluation that the engine gives, and more importantly, when those evaluations really matter. So feel free to check the link in the description if you want to know more about this. So let's move on to another position where according to the engine we have a dead equal position, but at a human level this is definitely not that easy. So here we have Eddie Skurel and Cristobal Villagra playing at the 2023 FIDE World Rapid Chess Championship. Here it is black to play, and this position is given as dead equal for the engine, but let's evaluate the position before. So here white has this very strong pass pawn that is ready to advance and even attack the queen. So if white is in time to play something like bishop to g2 and then push the pawn, this pawn is going to be very strong. So black has to be very quick here. And first of all, let's evaluate what happened here. Black is a very strong grandmaster, and black took on a3, which is a blunder because after the move queen to g3, we get a fork. Here black resigned because white is simply collecting this bishop on a3. But actually, even here, according to the engine, the move b6 is actually very strong, providing a decisive advantage. So this shows how this position was very complicated for black. Black had to be very precise to hold the balance. The only move given by the engine that holds the balance is the move queen to c1, with the idea to look for counterplay. Another move, which is bishop to e4, makes some sense because the bishop is better here. It also tries to stop the pawn. But let's evaluate black's best resource, which is the move queen to c1, and we now even see that the evaluation might switch, now dropping back to equality. So this is also another important point when you evaluate a position. Just go a few moves forward to make sure that this equality remains, because sometimes the engine might reevaluate the position. And here white has a few options, but there seems to be an equality. So here a natural move might be the move b6, just pushing this pawn, but black's idea is to go queen to h6, looking for perpetual check. And after king to g1, we see that black again has to be very precise because bishop to e4 is the only move that seems to be holding the balance. So here the idea is to go queen to h1, white can try something like bishop to g2, and now the idea is to keep on giving checks. Or if we try queen to f1, trying to stop these checks. Now here black again has to be very accurate, so we see that after queen to c1, black still had to find some very precise moves. Here the first move given by the engine is the move queen to d2, just in time to counterattack this bishop on d4. So for an engine, this might be very easy to see as a draw, but it might still look very scary for black to hold this game. So here one idea is that after bishop to f2, queen to g5, now black is in time to get counterplay. This pin is also very important. So the position should be balanced, but it is still a very messy position. So let's move on to the last position. Here we have an ending. In endings, the engines can be very accurate, but sometimes they can also be quite misleading. So here we have former world champion Bobby Fischer against Mark Taimanov playing at the 1971 candidates match. And if we analyze this position with an engine, first of all, we get a small plus for white, but these positions with very little material, they will come down to whether white will be able to exploit this material advantage of having an extra pawn into a win or not. So here Fischer tried rook to f6. In this position, black has many options. All of them are very close to equality. Here, black traded on f6, and after king takes, we still get a small plus for white, which again is a bit confusing because here it is going to be either a win or a draw for white with correct play. The main point is whether this pawn can promote or not. So here black takes, then after pawn takes, this pawn cannot be stopped, so this is going to be a win for white. but black doesn't have to trade on g4. So here the engine is giving a few options for black. One of them is the move king to d6 as the top option. And now we see how the evaluation is slowly decreasing. And if you play a few moves, for example after bishop to f5, now again we see that black can be very close to 0, but only with one move in this position by going knight to f3. The main point is to stop the move h4. That's why the move knight to f3 here is very important. And now again we see how the evaluation gets closer to 0. So here after the move bishop to g4, black can try to repeat, and after bishop to e6, knight to f3 is very close to equality, also knight to d3. So now we finally get an equal position, but black still has to be a bit careful to stop this pawn. For example, after h4, knight to f4 is the idea, attacking the bishop, and if the bishop moves, knight to d5, we give a check, and if the king moves, now again we play knight to f4, planning to sacrifice the knight for the pawn. In that case we'll get a drawn ending with king and bishop against the king. And if white tries to bring the king closer to the pawn, for example after knight to d5 and king to g5, black still has many ways to draw, but one idea is to bring the king to the corner, and there we would get a fairly easy draw. So if I go back to the position, now we see that after king takes, the engine is correcting its initial evaluation. Now it's giving a dead draw after king to d6 or knight to d3. Knight to d3 is probably not that easy to make as a move because the knight is going away from the pawn, but a move that black played in this position, let me remind you that black is a very strong player, which also looks like a very natural move, is the move king to e4, which actually loses the game. So we see how a fairly easy draw for an engine. The engine gave a lot of lines where black could hold the balance fairly easily. Here a very strong human played the move king to e4, which also looks very natural, just getting closer to the pawn is actually losing, because here white has one very strong move, which is the move bishop to c8. Just keeping the bishop on this diagonal, and now white is ready to push the pawn. So the game ended in a few moves after king to f4 and h4. The king cannot come to g4 because the bishop is controlling that square, and the knight cannot easily stop the pawn. By the way, another important point of this move bishop to c8 is that after knight to f3, planning to stop the pawn, now white gets bishop to b7, giving a check, and then white will capture this knight. For example, after king to f4 and bishop takes, king takes, and king to g5, now the pawn cannot be stopped. So after king to f4 and h4, now the ending is clearly winning for white. We get a plus 12. The point is that white will promote the pawn to a queen and give a checkmate. So the game continued knight to f3, h5, knight to g5. Here white played the move bishop to f5, h6 was also strong. And after knight to f3, h6, knight to g5, white will definitely not go h7 because black will happily sacrifice the knight for the pawn. But after king to g6, black has to move. If the king moves, then white simply picks up the knight. And after knight to f3, h7, knight to e5, and king to f6, here black resigned because there's simply no way to stop this pawn. So I hope that you get a better idea now. When you see a position evaluated dead equal for the engine, it might be a fairly simple position for us as well, but in some cases it might still be quite a messy position. The engine might also change its evaluation after you make a few moves on the board, and even if that position is dead equal for the engine, it might still be a nightmare for a human to play. So thanks a lot for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.